Hello, everybody. Welcome to NL Media. It is Sunday. It is June the 4th, and it is time to get down to business. Let's go live.
So, the high school drama teacher over here accuses others of liking the sounds of their own voices.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I was a high school teacher before getting into politics, and I'm having a little trouble remembering what exactly the job that the Leader of the Opposition had before getting into politics.
Yes, and he left right in the middle of the semester, and I'm having trouble remembering why.
The small fringe minority who are holding unacceptable views do not represent the views of Canadians whose heads are filled with people who chose not to get vaccinated. The risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people. It's never too late to do the right thing. We'll be immensely pleased to be able to give you that first dose of vaccine.
I'd like to welcome the fake news media,
and the ideology in order to push particular agendas. And I think some of those agendas, unfortunately, pretty hardcore, pretty extreme. The power of misinformation, because so much, of what we hear coming from these protesters from, a scientific perspective just isn't true. And
Can you state categorically? You are fake news.
Sir.
You are fake news. Excellent. Excellent. Don't you just want a world leader to start talking like that again, regardless of your political leanings? I mean, obviously, I can't vote for Trump. I'm in Canada. Probably wouldn't vote for Trump if I was in America. Not that I would vote for his opponent. I'd probably be spoiling a ballot or not voting, but that's my own thing. Anyways, welcome to the stream, guys. NL Media. It's Sunday. It is June the 4th, not January the 4th, as I alluded to earlier. We got a good one for you tonight. Tonight we have American weapons destined for Ukraine showing up pretty well anywhere but Ukraine. But tonight it's Mexico. And right on the border too, eh? Just fantastic stuff. We also have the Ukrainian military having tanks that they don't know how to operate, that they're being taught on the fly how to drive and operate and fire and use properly. And finally, we have Zelensky making a jealous girlfriend type bid into NATO. Remember, NATO has a meeting coming up in July, which will be just before BRICS. The new world order meets in August, and they're destined to announce their new world currency. This currency is expected to be, backed by precious metals, silver and gold, and the likes. So we've got the good one for you, and it's going to be, we've got a couple of clips for you to watch along the way to hammer the point home. So the first thing, like I said, weapons being produced by America, paid for by your tax dollars if you're in America, destined for Ukraine, which is already bad enough. You know what that's fighting and what that's fueling. But not showing up in Ukraine. They're showing up elsewhere. They're showing up with Mexican cartel leaders, out of all people. And we'll just get into it. We'll let you see for yourself.
You may think, if you live in North America, that, these weapons, that's all happening over there. I'm all good and safe. Well, why now are Javelin missiles that the U.S. sent to Ukraine showing up in the hands of Mexican gangs?
That's a good
in
question.
North America?
That's a good question.
That is what the news in Mexico is reporting.
miembro del cártel del Golfo en Tamaulipas fue grabado portando una de las armas más exclusivas y poderosas, un javelin, que en teoría se vende únicamente al ejército y
Okay,
ha sido...
so what she's saying here is that the cartel has a javelin, at least one, the most exclusive and powerful weapon that you can find. She says that this cartel member here, see, they freeze it and they show you, yeah, this came from Ukraine, that it is now in the eastern state of Tamaulipas, and that weapon that can be found on the black market right now is worth between $20 and $60 million. She also reports that dozens of US AT-4 weapons that were made in Sweden, originally given away to Zelensky in Ukraine, have indeed shown up in Mexico. This is in the border town of Matamoros. Take a look here on the map and see just how close that is to the US border.
You see how close that is to the border, and I think I had a bit of a mic issue going there, but I believe we're fixed now. So again, United States military equipment showing up, destined for Ukraine, showing up in Mexico, and the cartels have it. It's not just being bought by some private citizen. It's not being bought by the Mexican military, which would still be bad enough, guys. It's being bought by the cartels. And what do you suppose the cartels are going to be doing with American military equipment? Now, this is setting the stage for Mexico to be kind of seemingly more aligned with the opposition of Ukraine, which just so happens to be the world alliance they're trying to enter. Could be. And they also, now Ukraine has their own issues with the equipment that they are receiving. It's bad enough that they're having equipment destined for them that's being sold off to other gangsters. But now the stuff they are getting is too advanced for them. They're getting equipment that is new. And remember, as much as our cathedral media is going to mock Russia and make it seem like they're using this Soviet era equipment that's outdated and we're going to easily trample over them, it's all, as with the cathedral media, the inverse is always true. So that's what they told you, is that that's what the Russians are using. Well, it turns out that's really what Ukraine is using. And us as the dominating global force, as the Western, as the G7 funding Ukraine, this is what we're dealing with here. Take a look at this.
2014. So they are not going to be starting from scratch learning how to drive a tank here. They will have to learn how to use the Abrams tanks. They'll have to learn how to use the targeting system. The Abrams is a 4-person tank. The Soviet tanks have 3 people in them. So they'll have to learn details, but if you know how to drive a tank, you know how to drive a tank. So one way to think about this would be you go from a 10-year-old Toyota to a new Tesla. You know how to drive, you just have to learn how to do it on this new vehicle.
Now, just consider that on the fly now, in the middle of a war, they're receiving equipment that is so advanced, so modern, so current, that their military doesn't know how to operate it. And just remember that this cathedral media, this mainstream lunacy media, wants you to believe that the Russian military is using Soviet-era outdated equipment, and they've got, the lowest morale ever, and they're forcing their men into war. You'll hear me say this all the time. When you're told something by the mainstream media, regardless of what it is, take it and flip it on its head. Whatever the opposite is of what they're saying is usually closer to the truth than what they are saying. So let's try that theory. Russia's using outdated Soviet-era equipment. They're forcing their men into battle because their numbers are so low, they're doing so bad, and their morale is so low, yada, yada, yada. Well, it turns out the actual opposite of that is true. It just so happens that that's happening in Ukraine. Men are being rounded up and conscripted into the war. The ones that haven't fled like absolute cowards from their country to be refugees in the first world right now. So they're putting up with a military that doesn't know how to use the equipment they're getting because it's too modern, it's too current of an era style equipment. Now, because they know they're fighting, or they're losing a fighting war, and this is how you know, for those of you who are paying attention, this is how you know it's done. Zelensky is so desperate that he's telling NATO, I won't come to your meeting in July unless you fast track full membership for us right now. And we don't need to tell you what full membership for Ukraine in NATO means.
Here's what he said. Ukraine is ready to be in NATO. We are ready for when NATO is ready. We need all the unity through the alliance, and we are working on it. He says he needs a clear invitation to Ukraine is needed. Doubts must vanish. Positive decisions for Ukraine will be positive for everybody. There should be no hot war or frozen conflict on our continent. When there are no security guarantees, there are only war guarantees. So he's basically saying, look, we're in this war because we're not a full-blown part of NATO. You're not protecting us.
There are no security guarantees. You need to make sure you understand what that means. If you are a part of NATO and another country that's not a NATO nation encroaches on your quote-unquote land, the rest of the NATO nations are now bound to operate in your defense. And you can see how this gets tangly if we fast track Ukrainian membership into NATO, and Russia is not a part of NATO. Now the NATO nations, the G7, the West, us, are now bound to militarily back them. Not just this change your profile picture and send a couple of billion in aid. No, now you got military going. Forcibly. Not that they're not already there now, but forcibly they have to start providing. And this is what Zelensky has been after the whole time. He's been after NATO. And NATO is playing, guys, don't think it's Zelensky playing NATO like a fiddle. It's more the opposite than anything. NATO has been dying for a war on the Russian front ever since its creation. That's the whole purpose of NATO, was to create an alliance that would poke the bear and start another war for the military industrial complex. So they're using Ukraine right now as a proxy to poke Russia. And keep in mind, there's something organic happening in Ukraine on top of that. And then there's other aspects of what's being used in Ukraine. But let's take a look. Clayton Morris from Redacted News had a little 1-minute clip about NATO, Russia, and military responses, the weapons, summarization of what we've talked about tonight so far. Just have a listen here.
People questioning whether or not this is in fact a Javelin, and there's differing opinions of exactly what model number this is. By the TV station, specifically the Mexican TV station, identified it as a Raytheon-made FGM-148. It is believed to be a Javelin missile launcher. And so I don't know where the distinction is, but we know that, of course, a lot of these have already been flooding into parts of Africa. They've been flooding into parts of the Middle East. Most of this stuff is winding up. We've shown you websites. We've shown you almost like eBay style black market websites where this stuff is being sold on the black market. Russia has gotten their hands on it. They've been able to buy the stuff on the black market and show that we have American weapons that are right here. Mm-hmm. The Wall Street Journal has admitted that most of these weapons they can't track and follow. So it's not a surprise at all. And some in the chat are even saying, wouldn't be surprised if we actually sent them directly to the cartel, which that is something I hadn't thought of before.
Now, that brings me to my final thought on this. The setup of the weapons and the funding and the funneling and the washing and laundering of finances throughout this, because this has been one of the proxies of this war is absolutely a financial washing. And the military-industrial complex will never miss an opportunity to stick its nostrils into a global conflict that it can fund and profit from. It's happened time and time and time and time again. How often have we fought in a conflict in one area and had weapons from either of those conflict areas show up somewhere else, utilized by somebody else, usually against us, or used in a manner that ends up needing or requiring, quote unquote, our intervention. It's the military-industrial complex circle. Create a problem, provide the resolution. Create a problem, provide the resolution. It's a cyclical pattern that's happened since we can start at World War I just for the sake of dropping a pin somewhere and going. But arguably since the dawn of time, since Rome, this is how they've operated. And they isn't one specific person. This is how global elites, this is how leaders of nations have always operated. It doesn't have to be about international global cooperation. Greed and this kind of fraud and corruption can and is absolutely localized and then compounded and then also internationally organized and utilized and down the line. So this has happened before. You have the cathedral media now, Wall Street Journal, admitting they can't track this stuff. It leaves the States. They manufacture these death machines. Okay? A javelin is a death machine. It gets manufactured, and once it leaves here and there's a payment made, blind eye gets turned. Now, where does it go? We can't track it. We don't know. And guess what? We don't care. We've been paid. And that is the unfortunate truth about late stage capitalism, which is where we are right now. And we're watching our system collapse in front of our eyes. Some are unwilling to even admit it's happening. And you'll lose everything, and your pronouns will be was and were before you realize it fully. But sooner than later, we will not be the top dogs, and it will be because of our own actions or, worse, our own inactions. So that's everything we wanted to cover for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. It's been fantastic for Sunday, June the 4th. Really appreciate you coming out. And as always, guys, you people, you stay sovereign, okay?
So, the high school drama teacher over here accuses others of liking the sounds of their own voices.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I was a high school teacher before getting into politics. I'm having a little trouble remembering what exactly the job that the leader of the opposition had before getting into politics.
Yes, and he left right in the middle of the semester, and I'm having trouble remembering why.
The small fringe minority who are holding unacceptable views do not represent the views of Canadians whose heads are filled with people who chose not to get vaccinated. The risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people. It's never too late to do the right thing. We'll be immensely pleased to be able to give you that first dose of vaccine.
I'd like to welcome the fake news media,
and the ideology in order to push particular agendas. And I think some of those agendas, unfortunately, pretty hardcore, pretty extreme. The power of misinformation, because so much, of what we hear coming from these protesters from, a scientific perspective just isn't true. And
Can you state categorically? You are fake news.
Sir.